The legislative focus today is the flood insurance bill. Senators are seeking to make changes to the 2012 flood insurance law, including delaying the rate increases for 4 years. We've had several amendments to the measure introduced on the floor within the past hour. Debate on 7 amendments and a vote on final passage will happen later today or sometime this evening. The Senate's majority and minority leaders began today's session by reacting to President Obama's State of the Union address last night. Democratic leader Harry Reid of Nevada focused his remarks on the president's call to raise the minimum wage. Republican leader Mitch McConnell followed, calling the president's speech the same tired boilerplate, quote-unquote, and criticized him for failing to budge from his failed policies. Here's a look at their remarks.
Mr. President, over the last 45 months, America's private sector has added more than 8 million jobs. We heard that from the president last night. The stock market has soared. Productivity has never in the history of our country been higher, and Americans have even started buying homes again. But while the economy is gaining momentum, for far too many Americans, the hopeful headlines don't match the grim reality. For the last few decades, middle-class Americans have seen their paychecks shrink, even as corporate profits climb, and the wealthiest few do better and better. Now, Mr. President, as the President said last night, there's nothing wrong with people making money. We're all happy they're doing well. But the average CEO's income is multiplied 250 times. The people who work for that CEO is making less and less every year. That's happened during the last 30 years. The richest 1% have had their wealth increased by 3 times, while during that same period of time, middle class had their earning capacity dropped 10%. Average Americans are working even longer and even harder than they were 30 years ago and doing less in the way of remuneration. The difference is this: their hard work isn't paying off the way it used to. We must change that, and we can change that. It's not too late to ensure that American successes are determined by the strength of their spirits instead of the size of their bank accounts. 50 years ago, in his first State of the Union address, Lyndon Johnson declared unconditional war on poverty. Now, we've seen a lot of news accounts on that anniversary during the last month or so. But here's what Lyndon Johnson said 50 years ago. Quote, "Unfortunately, many Americans live on the outskirts of hope because of their poverty. Our task is to help replace their despair with opportunity." End of quote. Thanks to these innovative programs created 5 decades ago, including Medicare and school lunch programs, the poverty rate has fallen 40% since the 60s. But, Mr. President, there's so much work to do. The 67 richest Americans, their net worth increased $2 billion on average last year, every one of them. But you know what happened? During that same time, 1 million more American children dropped into poverty. So there's much more to do. Too many American families still live on the outskirts of hope, struggling to survive and falling well short of the American dream. Last night, President Obama laid out a plan to breathe new life into this country's struggling middle class. The President's charted a course to build on the economic progress we've made over the last 45 months and to guarantee that progress is felt by every hardworking American. And he challenged us, Congress, to work with him to replace despair with opportunity. President Obama called for common sense investments in our future, investments that have been deferred for too long. If America hopes to rebuild and maintain a world-class economy, we must build the 21st century infrastructure to support that economy and a cutting-edge energy supply to power it. We must prepare today's students for tomorrow's jobs by ensuring a higher education is within reach of every promising student. We must give small businesses and manufacturers the support they need to thrive. And we must ensure every American earns a living wage during their working years and has the opportunity to retire comfortably. I support the President's action to raise the minimum wage for private contractors who do work for the government: janitors, food servers, dishwashers, construction workers. No American working a full-time job should live in poverty. Congress must act to raise the minimum wage for all of our nation's workers. A strong middle class and an opportunity for every American to enter the middle class is the key to this nation's prosperity. Last night, the President also asked us to renew our commitment to the principles upon which this country was founded, the principle that made this country great: fairness, basic fairness. We must make certain that every American, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, race, or income, has the opportunity to be a full, equal participant in the workforce. There are no guarantees in life. Not everyone succeeds, but every American deserves a fair shot at that success.
Mr. President.
The Republican leader.
I'd just like to say a word this morning about the President's State of the Union speech. And let me say that I think Congresswoman McMorris Rodgers did a great job representing our party and the people of Washington State's 5th District last night. Frankly, I wish the President had laid out an agenda half as hopeful as the one she did, because the State of the Union address is always an important moment for our country. It's an opportunity for the two parties to come together with the President, members of the Supreme Court, and other government officials to show a kind of unity, even in the midst of the great debates that we have here every single day. It's a worthy tradition. And last night, the President had a real chance to unite the nation around a forward-looking agenda. He had a huge opportunity to reach to the middle and chart a new path at a time when nearly 70% of Americans say the country is either stagnant or worse off now than when the President took office, that we're on the wrong path. It could have been a legacy-making moment. Instead, it was the same tired boilerplate we hear year after year after year. And when you peel back all the adjectives and the anecdotes, all the platitudes and nods to the left, what remained for the middle class? Largely the same tired policies that led us to this point. The same failed agenda with its legacy of stagnant unemployment, lower incomes, growing inequality, and crumbling pathways to the future. The only difference is that now the President wants to keep doing the same old thing, just without as much input from the people's elected representatives in Congress. Basically, all the same policies, less of that pesky Democratic accountability. Because the President didn't talk about embracing a positive new agenda last night. He didn't talk about reforming our tax code in a way that would drive private sector growth and job creation. He didn't talk about finding serious ways to start reducing a massive $17 trillion debt that threatens to suffocate our economy and crush the dreams of our children. He didn't talk about saving Social Security and Medicare, or about streamlining and slimming the size of government, or about setting America's entrepreneurs and small businesses free to dream and to succeed. As for energy, the President's plan seems to boil down to more regulation and new taxes on energy production. For all of his talk of phones and pens, he didn't even mention using his pen to sign off on the Keystone Pipeline. It's the single, simplest action he could have taken to create jobs soon. And it's a project that wouldn't have created thousands. It's actually a project, as I indicated, that would create jobs right away. And it still can, if the President will just lead. Unions support it. Powerful members of his own party support it. The American people overwhelmingly support it. But there's one small group that doesn't support it: special interests on the far left. Well, the special interests on the far left won last night, and the middle class lost. And you know, there's another big issue where the President turned his back on the middle class. And that, of course, is Obamacare. The State of the Union was the President's opportunity to finally admit his...
I would ask that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection, the quorum call be suspended.
Thank you, and may I speak in morning business?
The Senator has the floor.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I rise today on behalf of 18,000 Nebraskans who have contacted me to express their concerns with the negative impacts of Obamacare. Rather than addressing these problems in last night's State of the Union address, the President doubled down on this failed policy. The President had his chance to speak, and now I believe it's time for my constituents to have their voices heard. The law, Mr. President, is hurting my constituents. It's hurting middle-class families. We now know that millions of Nebraskans have lost their private health insurance. Many who have successfully enrolled in the exchange have been forced into plans that don't meet their family's needs. These plans often cost more, but it covers less. Treatments, even for those battling cancer, have been delayed. We learned this month that a woman named Josie, who was diagnosed with breast cancer, recently lost her doctors. She was forced to postpone her scheduled biopsy and follow-up treatment. The reason? Josie's insurance rolled over into a new plan in the exchange under Obamacare at the start of the new year. Seniors are losing their trusted doctors, too. Americans are disclosing deeply personal information, including their health care histories and their Social Security numbers, to this flawed website that is ripe for hacking. If truth in advertising rules applied to Obamacare, it would be banned as an unfair and an unreliable product. Let me give you an example. We were all told that this massive law would dramatically expand coverage for the uninsured. Yet a recent Wall Street Journal article cites a McKinsey study that undermined this promise. Quote, only 11% of consumers who bought new coverage under the law were previously uninsured, according to McKinsey & Company's survey of customers thought to be eligible for the health care law marketplaces. One reason for people declining to purchase plans was affordability. That was cited by 52% of those who had shopped for a new plan but not purchased one in McKinsey's most recent sampling performed in January. As it turns out, the Affordable Care Act is hardly affordable. And the vast majority of those who purchased insurance through the exchanges already had health insurance. Last week, the CEO of Aetna, a major insurance company, said Obamacare was not attracting enough uninsured people to work. He said more premium increases are on the horizon. Are they going to be double-digit, he said, or are we going to get beat up because they're double-digit? Or are we just going to have to pull out of the program? And recently, Moody's downgraded health insurers from stable to negative based on the uncertainty related to Obamacare. The downgrade is a result of the administration's series of unilateral changes which only invite more uncertainty. This pervasive uncertainty is also plaguing our small business owners who are struggling with the onslaught of new regulations. Americans see selective delays for some, but not for all. Hardworking men and women, our entrepreneurs, are the backbone of our economy. Any sort of meaningful economic recovery will only come when they have the confidence to grow and expand their businesses, and that requires certainty. Obamacare robs them of that certainty, and as a result, the unemployed are robbed of jobs. It's not just those searching for work who suffer from Obamacare's heavy regulatory hand. Our senior citizens are at a loss as well. The Washington Post recently described challenges facing Medicare Advantage patients because of Obamacare. Obamacare has cut over $500 billion from Medicare, and now insurers are terminating physician networks. According to the Post, insurers say they must shrink their physician networks because they face billions of dollars in government payment cuts over the next decade, reductions that are being partly used to fund insurance coverage for millions of people under the Federal Affordable Care Act. And it's not just our seniors, it's also the young. A recent study by the American Action Forum found that it would be cheaper for 86% of young adults to forego coverage. The study concluded, and I quote, "Even after the mandate penalty is fully implemented, a majority of young adult households will find that it is financially advantageous for them to forego health insurance, pay the mandate penalty, and personally cover their own health care expenses." Without the participation of the young, healthy people, we are told the whole system will collapse. Then what? Well, to add insult to injury, some Obamacare proponents want taxpayers to pick up the tab for insurance companies, assuming that the whole system might, in fact, collapse. Instead of calling this a bailout, which is what it is, they use terms that could only be coined in Washington, terms like risk corridors, reinsurance funds, or risk-sharing protection. The White House may even preemptively alter portions of this program for big insurance companies before the law falls apart. I believe Americans have paid enough. That's why I have co-sponsored Senator Marco Rubio's Obamacare Bailout Prevention Act. The President and big insurance companies should not be permitted to force taxpayers to pay for the mess that they created. Nebraskans have no interest in any more bailouts, and they certainly cannot afford to pay for these skyrocketing premium spikes. Just ask my constituent from Lincoln who wrote me recently to share her story. She said, "I spent 2 hours on the phone with healthcare.com. The supervisor said she was going to try and reapply and reinstate my plan beginning January 1st, 2014. After an hour-long process, everyone but my 15-year-old son was approved for health care. So then she tried to apply again. An hour later, the system crashed, and she asked me to call back later. So I called back yesterday. I had to go through an hour-long process again for signing up. At that point, all 3 of my children were completely denied coverage. My husband and I are seriously scared. If something catastrophic happens, our family will be ruined without health care for our children." These hard-working, middle-class families need relief. They are overtaxed and overburdened. People are scared. The law has not brought what the President promised. The cost of this flawed law is depriving Nebraskans the opportunities to build their own futures and pursue their own dreams. Scrapping this law should be a priority for the Senate, the White House, and for the country. It is certainly a top priority for me. We must repeal and replace this law now. Anything short of that is irresponsible. Our constituents are counting on us. Let's not disappoint them. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Alexander.
Madam President,
Senator from Florida.
I ask consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Madam President, I am here to say hallelujah that it looks like we are finally coming to the point at which we can grant the homeowners and businesses of America some relief from the huge, gargantuan, tenfold sometimes increases in flood insurance premiums. We're going to be able to pass this legislation today with a cutting off of debate yesterday of over 80 votes. I mean, there were times that we were just hoping to get to 60 votes. And I think that overwhelming number finally tells the story that Senator Landrieu has told this story from the housetops, from the basements, from the river banks, and from the Gulf shores. Enough, along with Senator Menendez, who has shouted it from Cape May, New Jersey, all the way to the port of New Jersey at the mouth of the Hudson. And this senator has shouted this from the state with the longest coastline of any state save for Alaska, a state that its highest point in the entire state is about 350 feet, and therefore naturally along riverbanks, lakes, as well as the coastal waters. It's something that we have to be concerned with, and that's flood protection, and therefore protecting the financial assets of folks, their homes, their businesses. And they simply can't take a tenfold increase all at once. And so now we're going to pass it. Now, unfortunately, there are still some folks that are trying to do us in. And they're trying to do us in with subtle amendments that are going to try to seduce some senators. Oh, doesn't this sound good, but it's going to cut the heart out of it. And we have to reject those amendments. And at the end of the day, we'll have the votes here in the Senate, and we'll pass it. Now, the question is, what happens down there at the other end of the Capitol? And let's just get a real big vote here, and that will send a message to our colleagues in the House of Representatives that this is no fooling time, that these rate increases are already in effect as of January the 1st, and that we need to stop the rate increases in order to have time for FEMA to do the affordability study, and therefore to see what is consumable among consumers, homeowners, business owners, and then have that be a consideration along with the actuarial soundness. Now, I'll just conclude my remarks before I thank Senator Landrieu by saying that one of the toughest jobs that I've ever had in public service, and I've been blessed with a lifetime of public service, is the elected insurance commissioner of Florida. And I learned something about insurance during those years. And this thing called actuarial soundness is a mathematical proposition whereby the expected risk and the expected loss, you want to charge enough if you're an insurance company to handle that. That's the theory of actuarial soundness. We know that part of the angst here about the federal flood insurance program is that it in essence has been subsidized by American taxpayers because it was never charging enough. But the question is, what is the real risk? To take two unusual events, namely 2005 flood losses in the flood insurance program as a result of Katrina. Katrina and its flood losses is not a garden variety Category 3 hurricane, because the counterclockwise winds came on to Mississippi, not onto Louisiana, but the back end of the hurricane on the counterclockwise rotation came across Lake Pontchartrain, filled up the canals in New Orleans. The water pressure got so great as the water level rose, and what you had were some faulty dikes. And when the dike was breached, parts of New Orleans flooded. And that caused massive, massive financial loss. The other unusual event, which Senator Menendez can tell you about, happened a year ago in Hurricane Sandy. Again, a very unusual occurrence. Now, we can talk about climate change, and that's an issue for another day. But it's very unusual for a Category 1 hurricane to hit the northeast coast of the United States in those late months when it's cold, because the water is cold and it's not hot enough to really fuel a hurricane. But this one did, with the result the northeastern coast isn't exactly accustomed to hurricanes as we are in Florida. And as a result, you saw massive losses, not so much from the wind, but from floods. Not just along the coast, but look at what happened on the inland areas all the way through New England. Huge losses in two unusual climactic events. And so as you are calculating what is the actuarial soundness in order to adjust a flood insurance premium to, should those be considered in what ordinary people, over 2 million policies just in my state alone, 40% of all the flood insurance policies in the state of Florida? That's why we also need that recalibrated and calculated to find out what is affordable in the affordability study. So I'm very, very grateful. And finally, I will say that I can't say enough about Senator Landrieu. This wouldn't have happened without her. She has been dogged in her determination. She has been unyielding in her attempts to get it to where we are actually going to pass it in the Senate. And I just want to express my personal appreciation to Senator Landrieu on behalf of the people of Florida, indeed on behalf of the people of the United States. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Maine.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to proceed for up to 10 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I would also ask unanimous consent that my full statement be printed in the record as if read.
Without objection.
Madam President, today I rise to introduce the Retirement Security Act of 2014, legislation that I'm sponsoring with my good friend, the senior senator from Florida, and the chairman of the Senate Aging Committee. Our bill would encourage small employers to offer retirement plans, encourage employees to save more for their retirement, and ensure that low and middle-income taxpayers are able to claim tax benefits for retirement savings already authorized in law. Madam President, I thought it was interesting last night that the President in his speech highlighted what is a growing problem in this country, and that is that people are unable or have not saved sufficiently to have a comfortable retirement. The bill that we are introducing today is an outgrowth of our work together on the Special Committee on Aging. Last fall, the committee conducted a hearing on retirement security where we heard from witnesses that far too many American seniors have real reason to fear that they will outlive their savings. According to the Nonpartisan Center for Retirement Research at Boston College, there is an estimated $6.6 trillion gap between the savings American households need to maintain their standard of living during their retirement years and what they actually have. That is an enormous gap that speaks to the fact that we need to shine a light on this problem. Nationally, 1 in 4 retired Americans has no source of income beyond Social Security. In Maine, the number is 1 in 3. 4 in 10 seniors rely on that vital program for 90% of their retirement income. Yet Social Security provides an average benefit of just $1,294 per month, less than $16,000 per year. It's hard to imagine stretching those dollars far enough to pay the bills. Certainly, a comfortable retirement is out of the question. According to a survey published in 2012, more than half of all Americans are worried that they will not be able to maintain their standard of living in retirement. That is up sharply from 34% 2 decades ago. And they are right to be concerned, Madam President. Projections published in 2010 by the Employee Benefit Research Institute, EBRI, show that nearly half of early boomers, those between ages 56 and 62 when the study was conducted, are at risk of not having enough money to pay for basic costs in retirement, such as uninsured health care costs. There are many reasons for the decline in retirement security facing America's seniors, including the severity of the recent financial crisis, rising health care costs, the need for long-term care, and the fact that Americans are simply living far longer than they did in the past. The shift from employer-based defined benefit plans, pensions in other words, to defined contribution plans like 401ks also has played a role. Another contributing factor we found is that the employees of small businesses are much less likely to participate in employer-based retirement plans. According to a recent GAO study, more than half of the 42 million Americans who work for businesses with fewer than 100 employees lack access to a work-based plan to save for retirement. Cost and complexity are among the reasons plans are not more widely offered by small businesses. Chairman Nelson and I believe that making it easier for smaller companies to provide access to retirement plans for their workers would make a significant difference in the retirement security for millions of Americans. That is why the bill we're introducing today focuses on reducing the cost and complexity of retirement plans, especially for smaller businesses, and on encouraging individuals to save more for their retirement. Let me describe some of the provisions of our bill. First, our bill would allow small businesses to enter into multiple employer plans to jointly offer retirement programs to their employees. This allows smaller companies to share in the administrative burden of a retirement plan, which helps in turn to lower costs. Current law discourages the use of MEPs because it requires a connection or a nexus between unrelated businesses in order to join an MEP, such as membership in the same trade association. Our bill would waive that nexus requirement for businesses with fewer than 500 employees. We also provide a long phase-out so that businesses are not automatically disqualified when they hire the 501st employee. Second, our bill makes joining an MEP a more attractive option for a small business. Under current law, if one employer in a multiple employer plan fails to meet the minimum criteria necessary for retirement plans to obtain tax benefits, all employers and their employees could lose their tax benefits. These benefits are substantial. For employees, they include delaying the taxation of income contributed to a plan until they withdraw those funds. For employers, plan disqualification could result in limited deductions and a higher tax burden. Our bill directs the Treasury to issue regulations to address this uncertainty and protect members of an MEP from the failure of one bad apple to meet its obligations. Third, our bill reduces the cost of maintaining a retirement plan. Current law requires that participants in a retirement plan receive a variety of notices. Our bill would allow Treasury to simplify, clarify, and consolidate these required notices, again creating savings that can be passed on to employers. As ranking member of the Committee on Aging, I have heard countless stories of retirees whose savings did not go as far as they had anticipated. Adequate savings reduce poverty among our seniors during what should be their golden years. As the Health Committee report noted in July 2012, elder poverty also increases Medicare and Medicaid costs and strains our social safety net. Giving those not yet at retirement age more opportunities to save and to save greater amounts of money may help to ease this additional burden on entitlement programs that are already projected to run into financial trouble. The Retirement Security Act of 2014 encourages those still in the workplace to save more for retirement. The existing safe harbor for so-called automatic enrollment plans effectively caps employee contributions at 10% of annual pay, with the employer contributing a matching amount of up to 6%. We create an additional safe harbor for those plans that would allow employees to receive an employer match on contributions of up to 10% of their pay. I recognize that businesses that choose to adopt a plan with this new optional safe harbor may face additional costs due to the increased employer match. That is why our bill helps the smallest businesses, those with fewer than 100 employees, offset this cost by providing a new tax credit equal to the increased match. Now, Madam President, I want to emphasize that the retirement plan options for businesses, including in our bill, are just that. They're options. They're choices. No business, large or small, would be required to offer a retirement plan under our bill. Some firms facing an uncertain economy and rising health care costs may choose to spend their limited resources elsewhere. Accordingly, our bill ensures that current measures to encourage savings are functioning as they were intended. And one such improvement is the so-called Savers Credit, which reduces the tax burden on low and middle income individuals who contribute to retirement plans. Yet this credit currently cannot be claimed on the short tax form, the 1040EZ, which is used by individuals with incomes under $100,000. A study found that only 23% of people with household incomes of less than $50,000 per year, the group most likely to qualify, was even aware of the Savers Credit. To address this problem, our bill directs the Treasury to make the credit available on the shorter tax form. In light of the positive effects that this bill would have in strengthening retirement security for millions of Americans, I urge my colleagues to join Chairman Nelson and me in supporting our legislation. I'm very pleased that we have a number of groups that have endorsed our bill. I expect to have more to say about that next week. But at this point, I would encourage my colleagues to take a look at the hearing that Chairman Nelson and I held at the Aging Committee that focused a spotlight on this problem. We simply have too many of our seniors who are in their retirement years without sufficient funds for a comfortable retirement, and that can and should change. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
The Senator from Florida.
First of all, I want to thank my co-leader of the committee, the great senator from the state of Maine, who has been not only a great leader but also a terrific co-partner as we try to offer the leadership to the Aging Committee. We are literally trying to make bipartisanship work, and it's only because of folks like Senator Collins that this is working, and as a result, we've just got a terrific committee. The members participate, they come, they're engaged, they ask the questions of the witnesses. As Senator Collins has said, as a result of one of these hearings, with her leadership, she suggested putting together this important piece of legislation our committee held a hearing last fall called the State of the American Senior. And we wanted to look at the financial security of the average senior in retirement. We didn't like what we heard. Fewer than half of the workers even have access to a retirement plan. And those numbers shrink when you talk about employees who work for small businesses. 1/3 of the private sector employees work at small businesses, and nearly 72% of businesses with under 100 employees offer no savings plan. I want to repeat that. Of businesses under 100 employees, 72% do not offer a savings plan. So what do seniors then end up with? Well, they rely on Social Security to get by in retirement. And that's just simply not enough money to pay for housing and medical care and other expenses. Take, for example, my state of Florida. More than 3 in 5 people get half of their retirement income from Social Security. And here's a shocker. 1/3 of Floridians only receive Social Security income. 1/3 of all of the 20 million people in Florida receive Social Security income. That's all they receive is their Social Security. So there's a problem that needs to be fixed. Too many people are getting by with too little. And so Senator Collins and I have come together on this legislation aimed at increasing access to saving plans and creating more opportunities for those in retirement to put more money aside ahead of their retirement. And so Senator Collins explained it. We're going to try to pool all the small businesses together with their resources to take advantages of the economies of scale to create one plan. And it increases the safe harbors for things like automatic enrollment and escalation contributions, which have been shown as ways to get people to save more. So it's common sense, it's bipartisan. It's a great privilege for me to work with Senator Collins on this legislation and on our committee work. And, Madam President, I would yield the floor, and if no one else is seeking recognition, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
And the President spoke for about an hour on his fifth State of the Union address, and just off the House chamber, where both the Senate and the House meet to hear the President deliver his message, is Statuary Hall. And this is where the media sets up to talk to members of Congress following the speech. That's what we're going to be doing tonight on C-SPAN 2. Joining us first is Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson, a Democrat from Texas and a registered nurse. Eddie Bernice Johnson, you've been here for several years. How did this speech compare to some of his past?
Well, I think what this speech did tonight was make me feel responsible for getting something done. It's been easy to be pretty cynical recently, where everything is met with no. But when I looked up there and saw
that we are presently in a quorum call, and
Yes.
I ask that it be lifted.
Without objection.
I appreciate it. Madam President, may I ask unanimous consent that the pending amendment be set aside so that I may call up amendment number 2706.
Without objection, the clerk will report the amendment.
The senator from Rhode Island, Mr. Whitehouse, proposes amendment number 2706.
Thank you very much. I want to just say a few words about this amendment, which I hope we can pass. I think it is an amendment that will find strong bipartisan support. I am from New England, and across New England, but I suspect in Wisconsin and across the country as well, communities are trying to restore old rivers back to their healthy state. And what we see in New England, particularly in Rhode Island, with our history of the Industrial Revolution, is that our early industrial history was powered by hydropower. It was powered by damming rivers and then diverting some of the flow through a wheel that then drove the engines of industry, the mills, for instance, that were so important to Rhode Island's industrial history. And that's not just true in Rhode Island, it's true across New England. I suspect it's true in a lot of places across the country. So as local communities are restoring these old rivers, they tend to be small rivers, particularly in New England, and these tend to be small dams. And what we want to do is remove the old dam so that the original flow of the river is restored. Or we want to rebuild and maybe even redesign culverts so that the flow of the river through the culvert permits the passage of fish. And in some cases, we want to actually keep the dam but build a fish passage so that the demersal fish that are working their way upstream to their traditional breeding grounds find a passage and aren't blocked by the dam. And that is part, again, of bringing these old rivers back to life. So when you do that, it's usually, in my state, towns, small towns often, and local community organizations that have to apply in order to make those changes. Part of the application process is a flood map revision to show what change removing the dam or changing the culvert or adding the fish ladder will make on downstream conditions, and so the flood map gets redone. The flood map gets filed with FEMA, and FEMA requires a processing fee of more than $5,000 in order to review and accept the flood map revision. Now, what actually happens in practice is that the town or the local organization that is filing the flood map revision because they're repairing or replacing the dam or providing fish passage for it, they will apply to waive that fee. And virtually always, at least in Rhode Island and I think around the country, virtually always FEMA is willing to waive that fee. But the problem is these are small organizations and these are small towns, and it takes actually a considerable effort to put together the fee waiver application. So you may save $5,500 in the form of the FEMA fee, but you'll spend maybe close to that much on your lawyers and engineers and on time and trouble and working together to get that application done. So since these fees usually get waived anyway, this amendment would just cut to the chase and say, there's no fee. And because there's no fee, now you don't have to apply for a fee waiver. And that will help the small towns and the small organizations that are often behind these small projects. And I mean dams that are only just, 4 or 5 feet tall sometimes. The redesign of a culvert is not a major effort. Very important to local communities, very important to local fishermen, very important to local canoers and outdoorsmen, but not a terrifically big deal. So I hope that we can agree to eliminate that bureaucratic requirement. Neither NOAA nor FEMA have expressed any objection whatsoever to this. And if I can close, I'll read a statement by Chris Fox, who is the executive director of the Wood Pawcatuck Watershed Association. The Wood River and the Pawcatuck River run through western Rhode Island, and they are wonderful rivers. I have actually canoed and kayaked them both and enjoyed it immensely. He had to go through this fee waiver process for a set of projects on the upper Pawcatuck River, and he writes about this, I quote, "This amendment will avert lengthy project delays and reduce the cost of these environmentally beneficial projects nationwide. On behalf of the wildlife, water, and people who reside in and depend upon the health of the Wood Pawcatuck watershed, I thank you and all those who support this amendment." So I hope that all my colleagues will join together to earn Chris Fox's thanks for this, I hope, non-controversial and beneficial amendment. I thank the presiding officer. I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
John Sander.